Beyond its vast energy resources, the region of resplendent ethnic variety and cultural riches and millennial history with myriad archaeological treasures, the Middle East region should have been one of the most prosperous and stable areas on the planet. But in a frightening reverse alchemy, like many years before, it turns its gold into lead in the form of instability, aggression, and sectarian diversion throughout 2018. And now, as 2019 has just begun, the volatile region is still marred in controversy, corruption, betrayal, and despotism thanks to the regional rogue forces. After about 4 years, Takfiri terrorism in Syria and Iraq just about lost almost all major footholds in the region, marking a crucial juncture in the region's war on terror while morphing the geopolitics of the Middle East. The ambassadors of the regimes, which were ready to pay any cost to topple the Syrian legitimate government, are now disappointedly talking of reopening their embassies in Damascus. Just on the eve of 2019, Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir visited Damascus as the first visit by the leader of an Arab League state since 2011. That was followed by the UAE's regime decision to open its embassy in Syria, with the charge d'affaires assuming duties. Bahrain was another Arab regime announcing that work is continuing at its embassy in Damascus. After almost 8 years since the expulsion of Syria from the Arab League, it seems now that there is an increasing consensus among the League's members that Syria should be readmitted.
الظرف العربي تغير، الظرف في الميدان السوري تغير، هناك معطيات لا يمكن تجاهلها.
أعتقد بأن الإمارات الآن باتت تعي وتؤكد ومتأكدة 100% بأن الدولة السورية انتصرت والمشروع الإرهابي انحسر. لذلك الآن لابد من فتح العلاقات لأن هناك الكثير من الإرهابيين الذين ممكن أن يشكلوا خطرا على الوطن العربي ككل. وبالتالي أعتقد دعوة السيد المملوك إلى مصر، زيارة عمر البشير، كله يبشر بأنه سوريا عائدة إلى دورها المحوري الذي لا غنى عنه.
That was not the only bitter taste of defeat for the Saudi regime, which also witnessed its demise as the big brother among the 6 members of the so-called Gulf Cooperation Council, also commonly known as the GCC. Like many years before, the GCC failed to prove as a robust political and even economic bloc during 2018. Qatar was hell-bent on hitting hard the Saudis in the GCC over the dispute in the region, effectively used the recent GCC summit to assert its position, refused to accept the Saudi regime king's handwritten invitation for the Qatari Amir to attend the 39th GCC summit on December the 9th. Instead, Qatar sent its state minister to represent the country, inflicting a serious blow to the credibility of the Saudi-led council and widening the cracks inside the organization.
When you put all of these things together, when you put together the friction that they have, the fracture, even the breakup that they have with Qatar, the fact that Kuwait has refused to join in the complete blockade of Qatar, the fact that Oman has refused to join into the blockade of Qatar and has even increased its trade with Qatar. And of course, all these things combined with the fact that Saudi Arabia is vigorously looking for new allies, is now knocking on the doors in Sudan, in Eritrea, and Ethiopia. What we see here is that they are trying to shift the paradigm of what their alliance should be. And I think in many ways you can say that this indeed will mean the end of the GCC. Maybe they will still keep the name for their new alliance, but the GCC as we know it has obviously, I think, failed in achieving what they're trying to achieve, and will probably be replaced by a much more, maybe a smaller and maybe a geographically different, but a much more centralized Saudi-dominated union.
The Middle East regimes also publicly moved towards normalizing relations with the Zionist regime. Just as 2019 began, in the corridors of the palaces owned by the South Persian Gulf dictators, normalizing ties with Israel is all about the survival of their regimes through reordering and relabeling of regional threats. One could argue that the United Arab Emirates went further than Saudi Arabia in normalization with the Zionist entity and even in adopting the occupation regime's rhetoric during 2018. The Emiratis are now practically standing shoulder by shoulder with the Israeli military machine. It was last year when revelations by an Israeli journalist went viral on the internet, accusing the United Arab Emirates of being complicit in Israel's bombardment of Gaza through letting its aircraft join the aerial campaign against the besieged coastal enclave. The tiny regime also broke the taboo by agreeing to allow the Israeli judo team to display its flag and for its competitors to sing what is called their national anthem. The tiny regime, which was dubbed by General James Mattis as the Little Sparta, took a totally different track when it comes to a Muslim country in the region. It was a major player in the bloody war inflicted by a coalition of 9 African and Middle East countries against Yemen. Emirati aggressors did all they could to occupy Mocha port and Hodeidah, Yemen's largest port and the last major one outside Emirati control. They failed. After almost 4 years of waging an all-out air campaign, the Emirati regime seems to be no closer to reaching its goals. It has bitten off more than it can chew. Across the Bab al-Mandab Strait, through which much of the world's oil flows, the UAE also tries to strengthen its foothold in the Horn of Africa. The UAE has reportedly used the Eritrean base as a transit point for African soldiers from Sudan and Senegal. Not far from Eritrea, the Somalian government is also struggling with Abu Dhabi's hostile attitudes. At the heart of the tiny island of Bahrain and another close ally to the Saudi regime, business was as usual in 2018. The regime, which held the election without a single opposition party, announced a 67% turnout, despite over 70% of the total population being technically barred from participating in the election, thanks to its ban on any credible opposition party. The Khalifa family took steps to systematically close political and civil society space, arrest political opposition figures, bar members of certain political groups from running for office, and sharply restrict free expression. Despite Bahraini citizens' ongoing demands for the most basic human rights, the West's complicity with the Manama regime is still going on, ranging from all-out backing in international organizations to direct collaboration in detention and suppression of Bahraini peaceful activists.
The West is just looking at its own interest, just direct interest, and it will smash all the other people's rights. It will just see how much weapon it can sell to Bahrain, and it sees, because the Bahraini regime is part of this gangster of Mohammed bin Zayed, Mohammed bin Salman, and Hamad bin Isa. It just wants to get more money from these. For that reason, it doesn't look at the Bahraini people's interests. It will just overlook whatever goes regarding whether the people's demands of reform, genuine reform, the democracy procession.